So last year I talked about Squidward suicide, an extremely popular SpongeBob pasta about Squidward committing suicide and whatnot. Well, for whatever reason, I didn't add in the Red Mist edition to the pasta last year, so now I'm gonna finish off where I started. Well, there's not much to talk about, given that I covered most of this in the Squidward suicide video, but what I like in this rehash pasta is that there was an actual explanation on how the video was made, who created it, and we even find out who was responsible for the murders of the unidentified children in the previous pasta. It was also nice to add details about what had happened to some of the people that watched the video and the attempts to try to distribute said video to the world in various ways. To some extent, it even explains why it took so long for new episodes from the 4th season of SpongeBob to premiere on Nickelodeon. Now, keep in mind that I'm going to be repeating most of what I talked about last time, but there is new info put into the mix, so at least in case you never saw the first version, you can see it all here. Red Mist is a controversial, real-life bootleg tape featuring an unaired episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. Like the long-lost but recently discovered Suicide Mouse tape, Red Mist was purportedly created by a now-imprisoned Scottish animator for the series who intended to pass the tape off as a Season 4 premiere episode and feature the death of Squidward. Red Mist begins with Squidward preparing to practice his clarinet in his room. As SpongeBob and Patrick play merrily outside, Squidward wraps his mouth around his clarinet and is only able to play one note before being interrupted by someone knocking on the door. He walks down and opens the door and discovers that a traveling salesman is at his door. The salesman, a giant Scottish fish, asks if he could have a moment of Squidward's time. Squidward tells him that he isn't interested and slams the door in the man's face. Walking back to his room, the salesman begins knocking again, and Squidward opens the door angrily. The salesman, looking very upset, tells Squidward that the Red Mist is coming, and proceeds to walk off, confusing Squidward. Squidward walks back to his room and finally begins playing the clarinet. After performing several off-key notes, SpongeBob and Patrick begin laughing outside, interrupting Squidward yet again. Squidward walks over to the window and shouts at the two, telling them that he needs practice for a clarinet he will be performing at. SpongeBob and Patrick apologize for tears in their eyes and walk back to the houses. Squidward, unsure of himself, walks back over and begins to play his clarinet again, this time uninterrupted. The scene then fades to red over the course of 12 seconds. Perhaps by glitch, the same scene is repeated once more, which is somewhat common in rough cuts animation. However, this time, the pupils have been replaced with new, more realistic eyes with red pupils. Clearly not real, but more realistic and CGI or animated. The audio is also completely absent from the scene, save for occasional clicks. After the repeat of the previous scene, a new scene begins with the same red eyes, but at the theater where Squidward is playing his clarinet. The frames in the animation skip every 4 seconds, but the sound remains synced. After an unruly performance of a song he dubbed Red Mist, SpongeBob and Patrick are seeing the crowd booing Squidward, very uncommon for them. The scene pans to reveal the same Scottish salesman sitting next to him, also booing, as Squidward walks back to his home with his head in his tentacles. What's odd is that the scene actually shows him walking to his house, with nothing happening in the background, for 3 minutes and 50 seconds, before abruptly cutting to red for another 20 seconds, just as he arrives at his house. A new scene appears, back to the original cartoon eyes, with Squidward sitting in a chair in his room that night, with a blank look on his face, for roughly 30 seconds before starting to sob softly. Again, the audio is completely missing for most of the scene, until the sobbing begins. This is where the sound of a slight breeze through a forest can be heard in the background. It also begins very mildly zooming in on Squidward's face, only noticeable if you compare 10 seconds of frames side by side. The sound of him sobbing can suddenly be heard, very loudly and severe as the screen twitches in on itself briefly. The salesman's laughing can also be heard echoing in the background. After another 30 seconds, the screen blurs and twitches violently and a single frame flashes over the screen. Upon pausing it exactly on the frame, the viewer can see a real-life photo of a deceased 6-year-old boy lying in a forest in his underwear, whose face has been mangled, eyes been popped, and stomach cut open with entrails lying beside him. Next to him, the shell of the photographer is clearly visible with part of the photographer's hand appearing to the right of the screen. After this photograph is seen, it cuts back to Squidward sobbing, much louder than before, with what appears to be blood running from his eyes instead of tears, and the sound of the salesman is still heard. The sound of the wind in the forest is also played at a much louder volume, but now with the sound of branches snapping and the screams of a young boy is heard. After 20 more seconds, another single frame appears, this time of an 8-year-old girl in the forest, lying on her stomach in a pool of blood, with her back cut open and entrails piled on top. The shadow of the photographer is also visible. The scene reverts back to Squidward, now with the same realistic red eyes from before, completely silent and no longer sobbing. The sound of the forest can no longer be heard. Another 3 seconds later and it cuts back to sobbing, this time piercing loud and with the sound of the forest heard. The screams of both a young boy and young girl can be heard mixed together as the song Amazing Grace plays on both the clarinet and the bagpipes. During this, 7 frames are seen black and white of the boy from the first photograph lying in the woods. Over the course of the 7 frames, the hand of the photographer reaches in and grabs the boy's entrails as his remaining eye focuses on the man's hands and even blinks once. This cuts back to Squidward again, this time staring at the viewer as the sound of the salesman echoes,
"You're right.
and
The red mist is coming."
repeatedly. After 40 seconds of this, the camera quickly pans out to reveal Squidward holding a realistic gun, looking as if it was photoshopped into the scene. Squidward lifts the barrel into his mouth and fires, with blood shooting out from his head, and then the screen cuts to Zack. On November 7, 2004, after the initial animation of the storyboards were completed in Fife, Scotland, the tape was delivered to the lead animators and sound editors at Paramount Studios in Hollywood, California, during the middle of the night. The tape was taken into the editing room, which was watched by the animators and editors, as well as 2 16-year-old interns. The tape, which was supposed to feature the rough cut of Fear of a Krabby Patty, instead began with a title card using the name Red Mist. While thrown off at first, the animators continued watching, discovering the tape had been heavily tampered with as some sort of cruel joke. As a result, 3 animators were sent to the hospital, 1 editor retired, and 1 intern committed suicide. The tape was sent to the police, who determined that it must have been made by Andrew Skinner, a disgruntled animator from Fife, Scotland, who had been charged with 9 counts of murder, including the murder of the 2 children seen in the tape. Oddly enough, after going through the data of the VHS, police discovered that the last edit to the tape had been made exactly 24 seconds before it was watched by the SpongeBob staff. One copy of the tape was made by Chaz Agnew, writer of this article and the sole surviving intern from that night. Agnew has made various attempts to distribute copies of Skinner's tape in hopes to secure clearance rights to release it onto several online auction websites soon. Holy fucking shitballs, did this episode get a lot of hate recently? And now you're telling me that it might be a different version showing Plankton actually going through with the suicide? Damn it, Nickelodeon, what the hell is wrong with you? I mean, Brett Reynolds and Sanjay Craig is already bad enough for your network, but damn! But in all seriousness, this pasta is actually pretty well done. It's on par with Squidward's suicide because despite that this episode still airs on TV, it displays an even darker side to the episode. I mean, it was an episode making fun of attempted suicide. Imagine if Plankton had actually went through with it. That would make an interesting Halloween special. Hell, I could imagine a regular show doing this kind of shit. But not SpongeBob. What is interesting is near the end of the episode where it shows Plankton pretty much going to hell for committing suicide in such a vivid and depressing style. This pasta works much better because it doesn't go for mindless gore and it still sticks to the plot in hand from the beginning. The only gripe that I have with this pasta is that apparently it was accidentally uploaded to Nick.com before it was immediately replaced with the second version. Why have the first version on the computer to begin with anyway? It just seems kinda weird. Well, I think I've dabbled long enough with this. Let's finish off this video with Plankton Got Served, otherwise known as One Course Meal. I am sure many of you have heard of lost episode creepypastas. They are usually an incredibly graphic episode that conveys such fear for children that it was never aired, though someone managed to sneak a viewing of it or owned one of the tapes. The most popular example of this is Squidward's Suicide, in which Squidward commits suicide, hence the title. Of course, all these creepypastas are false. Yet, I remember a SpongeBob episode that was altered heavily, but still remains in circulation today. This is One Course Meal from Season 7. In the episode, Mr. Krabs finds out that Plankton is horrified of whales, and uses it to his advantage. This is one of the least popular episodes of the show due to the dark nature of the episode, even after the episode was heavily altered. Now, how would I have seen this episode before it was edited? It's simple, really. This is one of the 7 episodes that was revealed on the internet before it aired on TV. Always a big fan of the show, I was excited of the idea of having a SpongeBob episode premiere on the internet before television. I rapidly reloaded the Nick page, and finally the episode came up. It was known as Plankton Got Served, though it was eventually changed. Most of the episode is identical to the one that is circulated today. Plankton manages to break into the Krusty Krab and ties up Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob. As he is about to finally get the secret formulas from SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs' daughter, Pearl, walks in. This terrifies Plankton and causes him to run out. Plankton later claims his ancestors were eaten by whales, and that's why he fears them so much. Mr. Krabs realizes this fear that Plankton has and decides to use it against him. He dresses up as his daughter and begins to follow Plankton around, frightening him. Plankton decides he can no longer take it and decides to make the ultimate decision. Plankton decides to commit suicide. Yes, this is still in the show today, you are free to watch it. Plankton waits for the bus as he lies in the street, waiting to get run over. This is when SpongeBob comes over to try to convince him to continue his existence. This is where the alteration of the two versions begin. Plankton fails to heed SpongeBob's words and remains there. In the altered version that was shown, SpongeBob tells Plankton that it was Mr. Krabs' Pearl the entire time, and he gets up. In the altered version, though, SpongeBob says the exact same things, but Plankton refuses to believe him. SpongeBob decides the only thing he can do to show him the truth is to drag Mr. Krabs outside. Soon after he leaves, the typical red boss comes speeding along. Plankton sits up and watches it hit him as everything fades to darkness. Plankton finds himself standing over a single platform, overlooking darkness. In the darkness, he sees whales, all looking up at him. There are members of his family he can faintly make out, calling for him to jump down. Plankton looks above and sees a light he can scarcely believe. This would seem to represent heaven and hell. Plankton, resigned to his fate, jumps and plunges down into the darkness. This is when the episode ends, and the traditional credits for the show are shown, parallel to Plankton's descent to madness. Now some of you may say you saw the show as soon as it became available online. Apparently not fast enough. After seeing the episode online, I reloaded the page to find the altered version shown on the website. I kept reloading, curious of how I seen the first version. The only answer I can imagine from my viewing of the original episode that the creators uploaded the wrong file, and moments after uploading it recognized such. I may be the only one who saw this version. I truly did not know the sick ambitions the creators of SpongeBob have in mind with this episode. Why would a kids show betray death? Why would a kids show betray heaven and hell? Nevertheless, the unaltered version is impossible to find. I searched as hard as I can, and I have failed to find anything legitimate about the episode I had seen. People have told me that I've seen only the altered version, and they were too surprised that the Dark Phoenix betrayed in the episode. Nevertheless, I know what I saw. I know people will fail to believe me. People will accuse me of just trying to scare people. People would say I would have no evidence, there were no photos, there is no video evidence of this occurrence. I only saw it once, and it occurred to me to do such. I know the truth, and I want other people to know as well. Maybe someone out there saw this episode as well as I and can confirm it. Until then, I hope you enjoy reading about my experience.